French President Emmanuel Macron stated that in order to achieve strategic autonomy, Europe needs to reduce its dependence on the United States and avoid getting involved in a potential conflict with China over Taiwan, according to Politico and French Les Echos. French President Emmanuel Macron gave interviews to both media outlets on his plane after his trip to China. Macron spoke about the need for strategic autonomy for Europe to become a third superpower led by France. He stressed the need for Europe to reduce its dependence on the United States, particularly in terms of defense and energy, and focus on developing its own defense industry. Macron also called for Europe to reduce its dependence on the US dollar, following the example of Beijing and Moscow. He warned that if tensions escalate between the two superpowers, Europe would not have the time or resources to finance its strategic autonomy and would be under the US's control. The biggest risk for Europe is to get involved in crises that are not its own and that would prevent the construction of European strategic autonomy, Macron said, emphasizing that it would be paradoxical to start following American policy with a kind of panic reflex. The question that is asked of us Europeans is, will it benefit us to quickly bring up the Taiwan issue? No. For us Europeans, being a follower of someone on this issue and thinking that we should move to the rhythm of America or in response to China's excessive reaction would be the worst. Macron pointed out the necessity of this for Europe to take its place in history and stressed the need for Europe to avoid getting involved in a possible conflict between China and Taiwan. According to Politico's report, the Élysée Palace was pleased with the military exercise conducted around Taiwan by China after Macron left the country. The article notes that Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China have enthusiastically embraced Macron's concept of strategic autonomy, and Chinese officials frequently refer to it in their relations with European countries. Party leaders and Chinese theorists are convinced that the West is declining and that weakening transatlantic relations will accelerate this trend, the report said. The article recalls that hours after Macron returned to Paris, China began a large military exercise around Taiwan, which it sees as its own territory, and those around Macron welcomed the exercise as encouraging. The report said Macron had intensively discussed the Taiwan issue with Xi and that the two leaders had taken a more conciliatory approach than the United States and even the European Union. During a visit to China, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, told Xi Jinping during a meeting that stability in Taiwan is of great importance. The use of force that would change the status quo is unacceptable. In response, the Chinese president reportedly said, "Anyone who tries to exert pressure on Beijing through Taiwan is delusional." According to the news, Macron, who was reportedly in agreement with Xi on this issue, said, "Europeans cannot even solve the crisis in Ukraine." Would it be credible to say about Taiwan, "Be careful, if you make a mistake, we will be there"? If you really want to increase tensions, this is the best way to do it. The news reported that Macron had a more conciliatory tone when speaking with Xi during their 4-hour meeting alone, compared to his tone with von der Leyen and journalists present. The article emphasized that Macron, who constantly talks about Europe's strategic independence, did not mention the issue of the United States making Europe heavily reliant on military assistance since World War II. It was also noted that France, as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and the European Union's only nuclear power, was among the countries providing the least support to Ukraine. Politico reported that, as is often the case in France and many other European countries, the French presidency, Élysée Palace, insisted on reviewing and editing parts of the interview that belonged to Macron before publication as a prerequisite for him to give the interview. Despite this condition being contrary to Politico's editorial policy, it was accepted to secure an interview with Macron. The report stated that some parts of the interview where Macron spoke more openly about Taiwan and Europe's strategic autonomy were cut by the Élysée Palace.